what you're in for. So just to introduce myself, I'm Jez Ashdown. I'm a locality manager with Skills for Care, and I'm sort of got my colleague Carol with me helping out with this session. So do you want to say hello, Carol?
Hi everyone, I'm Carol Mitchel, Locality Manager at Skills for Care, working in GM alongside Jez, and I cover the localities of Manchester, Oldham, Stockport, Tameside and Trafford. Jez covers the other half.
So what we'll be doing in a minute is just sort of sharing some slides and going through some slides, but as it's quite a small group, feel free to, as we go along, to ask questions, put things in the chat. I think these sessions work better if they're interactive and if people can, contribute as we go along. And you're quite a mixed group, I think, in terms of roles and experience. So there might be stuff here that you can contribute that would be useful to other people to know. So sort of this is meant to be very much of an informal sort of interactive workshop. And the other thing to say is that we're sort of coming from this, because Skills for Care is an organisation that works with the social care sector on workforce issues. So we're coming at this sort of topic very much from a social care sector perspective, but I'm sure a lot of the issues in the topic are equally relevant to other settings, whether it be in the NHS or other sectors. So hopefully you'll find bits of this session sort of valuable. There'll probably be some bits that you're already familiar with. Hopefully there'll be some new content as well that you're not familiar with. So if you're okay, I shall share my screen, and then we can sort of you can make a start. So hopefully now you can all just see that first slide there. And as I said, sort of Skills for Care, we're funded by the Department of Health and Social Care mainly, and we have a work programme which is set by them, which is about supporting the social care workforce, and that work programme covers a whole range of different activities, from recruitment and retention through to leadership and sort of skills and personal development. So we are sort of engaged with social care providers and with other stakeholders, and everything that we develop in partnership with with the sector. So a lot of the content of this session is taken from Skills for Care resources, and when we send out the slides, we'll make sure there's links in there. So if you want to find out more about what Skills for Care does, there are links that you can follow. So just a bit about what we want to go through with this session. First of all, a bit of a conversation about why a place of work should also be a place of learning. A bit about how you can support your employees with their workplace learning. How you can support work experience placements. So we'll look at things like apprenticeships, nursing placements, and some of the resources that we've got around that. We'll talk about some of the supporting guidance we've got from Skills for Care, and as I say, when the slides come out, there'll be links in there that you can sort of find out a bit more about what Skills for Care does. And also at the end of it, we'd like you to go away with a takeaway with something that you're going to do, that you're going to sort of implement in your place of work. So that's roughly what we want to go through. And as I say, feel free to contribute in the chat, or if you want to sort of raise your hand if you disagree with something, then say so, and we can we can sort of have you can share your experience. So the first bit is, and I know this is probably stating the obvious, and it's sort of, but I think it's just worth stating about why a place of work should also be a place of learning. So when we look at some of the theories around sort of things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which everyone's familiar with, sometimes we don't really think about it in terms of learning. But when we look at sort of learning as a basic human need, it's really clear that in terms of when we look at sort of like a Maslow type model, that learning is part of that self-actualization. It's part of building people's self-esteem. So it is an important sort of personal need, and that need transfers into the workplace. So we're looking at it as being sort of fairly fundamental to keeping your workforce sort of engaged and motivated. It's really important when you're developing person-centered support, which is safe, flexible, and responsive. Particularly that, when you think about the responsive bit, that's about, how do we change? How do we, learn as we go? It's about supporting continuous quality improvement, improving productivity. And Skills for Care did a piece of work and brought out a guide around productivity in social care. I think it was about 2 years ago now. And one of the pillars of productivity is about learning and development. Improves retention, and we'll talk a bit about retention. So overall, it improves business performance, and whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, we're all very performance driven these days, and so so it is a contributor to actually improving business performance. And also it's part of, when we talk about having a culture of lifelong learning, that transfers into the workplace as well, and we'll sort of talk a bit about what that means, what we mean by lifelong learning in a minute. And so some of the characteristics that we're talking about when we talk about lifelong learning is, and there's just a quote there from from Henderson, which is about lifelong learning being multifaceted. Learners need to be motivated, feel included, develop relationships with other team members, and feel safe to ask questions and explore practices. And you'll see some of those things are reflected in some of those, some of the other sort of content that we've got for this session. So there's just a bit more about sort of what lifelong learning, and so we'll talk about sort of safe inclusive learning environments. We also need to mention sort of what's often referred to as teachable moments, and that's those things that happen in the everyday work situations where there's an opportunity for somebody to learn a new skill or reflect on something that they've done. So those teachable moments are things that you identify with somebody, as opportunities to learn. They're often sort of just informal things that crop up in an unplanned way. We talk a lot about sort of people learning from mistakes and successes, and what I'll do, I will sort of mention some of the resources that Skills for Care have got for around managers, and one of those is about learning from events. So learning from mistakes, learning from successes, and also learning as a shared social experience. So for a lot of people, learning at work provides the opportunity to learn in a social environment, which is really sort of for a lot of people a really good and strong motivation. And it's a continuous process, not a series of events. And I'm sure sort of those of you who've got an educational background will see that sort of that if we look at learning as a continuous process, one learning opportunity building on another, it actually helps then sort of build a group of skills with somebody, a group of knowledge. So it's about being a continuous process. As I say, we mentioned about improving retention, and I think we all understand how important retention is. Particularly at the minute, we're seeing retention in social care being a real issue, and I'm sure it's the same in healthcare and other sort of health and care sectors. And we, as an organisation, we've done quite a lot of research into retention. So we sort of what we're talking about is really sort of very evidence based. We did a report we published a few years ago called Secrets of Success, which was about sort of how social care, about what makes sort of a good social care organisation. And what we found is that we looked at employers where there was a turnover of less than 10%, and one of the factors that really has an impact on that low turnover, we were told by employers, was investing in learning and development. So we can see how important this is to retain the people that you've got and develop the people that you've got. It also links to things like embedding values in your organisation and celebrating achievements. So all those factors, sort of have a really positive impact on retention, which is why sort of I think Carol and I, when we're out talking to employers across Greater Manchester, we're always stressing the importance of investing in your workforce, because it's sort of the evidence is there that not only does it help develop the individual, but it helps keep that individual engaged with you as an employer. improves performance. So there are just so many reasons why we should be investing in people. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. So do apologise if I'm telling you what you already know. I've included just a bit of theory here because I wasn't sure who the audience was for this session. So for some of you, this is probably quite obvious and probably stuff that you've come across before. But when we talk about sort of models of learning, and when we look at sort of some of the sort of people's learning preferences, a lot of it comes down to Kolb's sort of 4-stage learning cycle, and that sort of feeds into some of the things that we do around learning styles. And I would imagine that a lot of you will have come across this sort of theory before, but the way it's sort of the Kolb sort of the 4-stage learning cycle is really what has fed into a lot of the learning styles questionnaires and that are used now in the workplace. So things like Honey and Mumford is very much based on the 4-stage learning cycle. Other things you might have come across are sort of the Fleming's, the VAC, or sometimes called the VARC learning styles, and there's 7. If you Google learning styles, learning inventories, you'll come across dozens of these sort of that are available to you to use. And I think what's important, or I think what I'm sort of just trying to sort of stress here, that the starting point of making your workplace a place of learning is actually understanding the needs of the learner. And what we find is that very often people do use sort of Honey and Mumford or some of these sort of standard sort of learning style questionnaires to try and identify with their individual learners sort of what is the best way of supporting them. But then it's about what you do about that. So some of the ones that you've, as I say, the ones that you will probably come across most frequently are sort of around sort of, based on these sort of learning preferences. So if you look at sort of, I don't know whether any of you sort of, recognise these within yourself or within sort of some of the work you've done with your own workforce, but this is just sort of, one way of looking at it, one model, which is, as I said before, the Kolb sort of learning styles. So this is based on sort of, if you do the learning styles questionnaire, it gives you sort of, an idea of people's preferences. And I won't go through it in detail because this will sort of, come out in the learning in the slides. But it's based on that cycle where people have a concrete experience, the learner encounters something, there might be a new situation they've come across, or a reinterpretation of an existing sort of experience that they've had in the workplace. There's then that reflective observation where it gives people the learner time to reflect on the new experience and put it in the light of existing knowledge. Then it goes through onto the abstract conceptualization and the active experimentation. So what you'll see with these sort of 4 learning preferences is that these are a combination of those different sort of of those 4 stages in the learning cycle. So just as a bit of background, really, just to sort of look at sort of how these have then been interpreted into the ones that you'll probably more commonly come across. I don't know whether this is sort of the one that's used in your organisation, but certainly Honey and Mumford, I've probably done the Honey and Mumford learning styles questionnaires about 10 times in my career, probably more than that. It seems to be that it's one of those that is sort of really sort of frequently used. And I think the value in this is that it gets you into a conversation with the learner. It gives them the opportunity to talk about how they feel they best learn, and it also gives you then an opportunity to feedback and look at what support you can actually offer that person. So if you look at the Honey and Mumford one, I mean, I think I think we did one at in our Skills for Care team not so long ago. And I've always come across as sort of, as a strong pragmatist, but also a strong reflector. So, and I recognise that in myself. So it helps me when I think about how am I going to learn? What do I need to do to improve, to make sure that my learning is successful? And I think with most people, they're a balance of the four learning styles Sometimes there's one that's a particularly strong preference. So when you're looking at sort of, designing sort of, a learning activity or a learning event for somebody, if they've got a really strong preference for something, then you really need to sort of, try and design something that sort of reflects that particular strong preference. But very often people are, have got quite a balanced sort of, learning style, which we without one particular one dominating. The other one that you might have come across, as mentioned, was this one, the VAC, or sometimes it's the VARC learning style, sort of self-assessment, and I find this one quite useful because what it looks at is really what is the learner's preferences in terms of taking in information, which is really important, when we come to look at sort of some of the the learning activities. So, when you're sort of working with somebody and you're supporting somebody's learning, actually understanding how they take in information is really important. So really, this looks at sort of there are three main sort of ways that people take in sort of information. There's visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. There's also some versions of this which has reading included, because some people prefer to learn by reading. And I think one of the things that is really interesting about this, when I did this on myself, I was very strong visual, very low on auditory, and sort of moderate in kinesthetic. And I think when I shared that with my partner, she told me that was why I never listened to her, because I have this terrible habit of, if there's a lot of verbal information and then there's visual information next to it, I will focus on the visual information and tend to avoid the auditory information. So I don't know, so for me, this sort of, this model sort of, makes sort of, real sense for me when as a learner. I also sort of like reading, so a lot of the stuff that I take in, it's from reading. So I think when you sit down, when you're working with a learner around how best to support them, this is a really useful model to get into that conversation with them. And I say, there's, there are some things, worth thinking about as we move into more digitalized learning, more online learning. For some people, online learning sort of, they really do struggle with it, because quite often with online learning, the mix of visual and auditory information can be quite a struggle. So if it's somebody like me, where you're looking at the visuals and ignoring what's being said, other people might be doing the opposite. So and the other thing is, it's also quite passive. So people who are really strong sort of kinesthetic sort of learners, they will quite often struggle with digital learning. So as we move into much more reliance on digital learning, and we need to be aware that for some people, it's not as effective. And there are some people who find it fine and get on great with it, but there are other people where it can really sort of be ineffective. And then if that person then sort of struggles with it, they will tend to be quite resistant to to digital learning, and it might sort of it impacts on their motivation. So I think this one is quite interesting to do if you rely a lot on online learning in your organization, and sort of when you commission online learning, when you go and choose what online learning to use, you might use this as a way of influencing your choices, because there's some there is some really good online learning out there, and there is some which is really quite bland and unengaging. So you might use this as a way of actually influencing how you choose what sort of online learning to use. So I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes now, and this is a chance, I think, for me to hear from you, really. So what I'd like really to do is if you can have a few minutes just to sort of either put in the chat, or if you want to sort of put your hand up, and then because Carol I can't actually see people's hands up, but Carol can then sort of bring people in to sort of share their experiences. But I'd really like to know what your thoughts are around have you completed a learning styles questionnaire, or learning styles inventory as it's often called, in the last 5 years, and if so, how useful did you find it? And I maybe share any that you've used that I haven't mentioned. There are loads out there, as I say. So are there any that you would recommend, for other people to use? And then secondly, sort of, would you support the use of these questionnaires, with your team or with your colleagues? So just sort of, Carol, you okay to sort of just see if there's, see if there's anything in the chat, if anyone's put anything in the chat about whether they've completed any learning styles?
Yeah, we've got a couple of comments coming in. So one person, Gillian, has said that she's never completed a learning style inventory. Katie has put completed over 10 years ago as a pre-reg student, helped at the time as a learner, most definitely. And one thing I would say, Katie, is, and like Jez, I've done one many times over my career, is actually sometimes it does change. I think as your practice changes, your preferences change maybe as well, maybe through different roles and different ways of working. So it's worth redoing actually for your own benefit and for informing, as learning and development people as well.
I think that's certainly true. I think that for me, the Honey and Mumford one is the one that has changed over time, but the visual, auditory, kinetic one, that stayed pretty much the same throughout the the last sort of however many years I've been doing it, which is quite
yeah,
quite
and
interesting.
we've got another comment as well from Anna. Has put, I've completed one several times, but normally at the start of a program when the material is already written, so seemed a bit too late. That's a really good point, actually, isn't it? And one of the things that I've done in previous roles is, as part of induction, we've done this to try and get a feel for, learners' learning styles when they're joining the organisation. But yeah, good point. And then Katie, it's from that point of view. I hadn't thought of that before. And then Emma, I'm the same as Katie, have completed one several years ago, but not recently. Just out of interest, it's probably worth doing again, yeah.
And I think your point there, Carol, about really, I would recommend that people do this before they start a program of learning, so it can then influence how that program is delivered. And I think particularly from for me, and within Skills for Care, we do quite a lot of online learning every year. We have to repeat things around our health and safety and all that sort of stuff. And for me, I really struggle to focus on some of these things, just simply because visually they just aren't interesting, And I think so. I think if if you want a learner to succeed, understanding a bit about how they learn and being able to adapt the content of your learning and the way it's delivered really helps them to succeed. And that's what we want to do. We want to help people to succeed. So I would suggest to people, if they haven't done one of these before, just do one for maybe just for your own benefit, so you can then, when you sit down and talk about your personal development, you've got something to talk about what support you need.
Jez, we've got a comment as well from Louise saying that she last completed one 3 years ago. Really helpful and good insight into what I'm drawn to. So yeah, really helpful.
And it might be that you want to do a couple just which look from different different perspectives. As I say, the two that I've mentioned there are two that I'm familiar with, but there are loads of others out there that you can use. So I'm just looking at the time. Time is ticking away, isn't it? Really. So just want to move on to just to tell you about a bit of research that the Good Employment Learning Lab did, which is due to be sort of published, I think next week, I think. And this was around supporting sort of managers of frontline staff. And I just wanted to pull out one particular thing from their findings, which was around what they identified from their research was these 8 learning pillars. I don't know whether there's anyone from MNU on this session, but it was a really sort of interesting sort of piece of work, and these are the 8 learning pillars that they sort of identified. I won't go through them all. What we will do is include a link, I think, in the slides when they go out, so you can actually go in to the Good Employment Learning Lab and find the report when it's published. As I say, it's not actually published yet. I've just seen some of the findings from it. And there are a couple of things I wanted to just sort of point out on this and talk about that I thought were really sort of resonated with me and with the conversations that I've had with employers. And the first one that I want to just mention about is psychological safety, because this is something which is, sort of, really sort of, I think, relevant, in terms of in the workforce. So looking at the sort of things that can impact on the psychological safety of the learner when they're sort of, when they're learning in the workplace. And I think one of the things which I sort of come across, and which I'm, people have talked to me about, is that power relationship between the learner and the teacher or the coach in the workplace can be very different. If you are somebody's manager and you are taking them down a program of learning, that is a different relationship to maybe the relationship between an external teacher or an external coach. So it's being aware of that. It's not necessarily saying that it's a bad thing, but it's just saying, be aware that might affect that relationship, because it could be seen that there's a power imbalance there. People's previous learning experience, either in the workplace or in education. We know that if people have had a really sort of poor experience in education, getting them to engage with learning in the workplace, isn't, maybe needs a bit of a different approach. So it's not presented as, a sort of traditional learning environment where they might have had a bad experience in the past. So it's trying to understand what people's learning experience has been. Looking at attitudes to colleagues and managers in the workplace. Is learning valued? If somebody sort of achieves something, is it, do colleagues and managers really appreciate that achievement and give that person, the opportunity to use that new sort of, skills or knowledge? Time pressures, competing priorities. It's if you give somebody a learning program and say, sort of, can you complete this? For instance, look at health and safety, for instance, or induction, saying, can you complete this within a certain period of time? You need to make sure they've got the time to do it. You need to make sure that if somebody is, whether it be an apprentice or someone on an apprenticeship or any other program, give them the time to do it, to do it well, so they're not feeling sort of under time pressure. Be aware of people's specific learning needs. There might be sort of, sort of people might not have told you that they might need extra support, say around sort of, reading and writing, around, there might be dyslexia, there might be, they might need other support. There might be sort of, ways that you can actually adapt, the way that learning is presented to make sure that people can access it more easily. And really, I mean, there are, loads of other factors, I think, in there that you could identify that have an impact on people's sort of psychological safety. So that those are just a few, and I'm sure there are loads more, but it's having that conversation with the learner to make sure that they feel that they feel safe, because people, the evidence is that people learn better when they are feeling safe, when they're in a low risk environment. And so that's sort of important to have that conversation, to make sure that people are in a safe in a safe place. The other one of the pillars that Jill identified was about reflection, and how important it is in learning for people to have the time and the space to reflect. And I think that's one thing that as a sector, in my personal experiences, that we are really bad at, is giving people time to reflect. People tend to go from one job to another, one task to another. They're so busy that actually giving people that space to go away for 10, 15 minutes and actually do a bit of reflection on what they've learned, particularly when we talk about things, as I say, sort of skills for care, we've talked to people about learning from incidents. And in order to learn from a particular incident, that might be something that's, a near miss, or that might be something that, that might be a positive incident. In order to learn from that, people need to take a step away and be given the space to go through the process of reflection. And certainly in nursing practice, in social work practice, and, in sort of, all this sort of professional practice, reflection is such an important part of it. But it's also an important part of people who are on an apprenticeship. It's an important part of people who are going through their induction. Reflection is part of that learning process. So we need to give people time to think about what happened, to explore their thoughts, their feelings, to evaluate, to analyze, to come to some sort of conclusion around what can be changed, and then to do a bit of experimentation. So this particular sort of model is I think if you come from nursing, you would be familiar with the Gibbs model, but I'm sure it's used in other professions as well. But this is just one example of a reflection model. But I think what I'm saying is, you need to give people time to reflect, and that means an opportunity to step away sometimes, or an opportunity to create, a space in supervision where you can do a bit of reflection, reflect on people's practice, reflect on people's experiences, and give people that opportunity to go through that learning process. So just quickly, I'm moving on. I'm sitting here looking at. I'm realising I'm talking an awful lot here, so I don't want to labour the point too much. When you look at a learning activity, it's choosing learning activity to fit with the learning outcome. So there's all sorts of different ways of looking at this. There's, I mean, when I did my when I was a nurse many years ago, and I did sort of what was the teaching and assessing clinical practice thing at the time. It's called something totally different now. We were always talking about this Bloom's taxonomy in terms of learning, which I think is probably really out of date now. But I'm sure there's much more sort of up to date sort of ways of looking at it. But it's looking at whether or not the combination between cognitive, affective, and psychomotor sort of learning, and what the mix is around those types of learning strategies. It's looking at, as I said, we talked about how effective is online or face to face for that particular learning outcome and that particular learners. The best person to teach or coach the learner, and looking at sort of the best settings for learning activities. Sometimes sort of learning in a really busy work setting isn't the best place for somebody to actually learn. So giving people the right environment is really sort of important. And what I wanted to do is just very quickly, and I think we haven't got 10 minutes for this because I've talked for far too long. Is actually look at a couple of learning activities that you might be involved with somebody, and actually give you a chance to sort of think about sort of how you would approach this sort of learning situation with one of your sort of employees, a team member. So what I'd like to do now, Sophie, if it's okay to sort of have a couple of breakout rooms, is just give you 10 minutes to actually have a look at this activity, and then sort of we'll sort of try and sort of stick to time, because I'm and really think about how you would approach these different activities, because we've got sort of potentially sort of if you've got in this situation, you've got a dyslexic learner, and you've got 3 different learning activities here. If you want to just have a maybe if we can go into breakout rooms now and just have a quick think about how you would approach these different learning activities. So is that okay, Sophie, if we go into breakout rooms? And I think actually, to be honest, as time is ticking by, can we make it's 5 minutes? Do you think 5 minutes is okay to do this? I think we do it in 5 minutes. So Sophie, is that okay?
Yeah, you've all been assigned, and it's just opening the rooms now. So you'll just all be whisked off.
That's good.
Have you assigned me and Jez, Sophie?
I haven't. Would you like to go
Yeah,
in,
shall we go into separate rooms, Jez?
Yeah, and we stick to 5 minutes then, shall we?
Yeah.
I'll do an give a 2-minute announcement.
Thank you.
I'll
Time is ticking away, isn't it?
And then I'll put you in. There you go. Oh. Oh, what's happened?
Probably. I wonder if I need to.
Oh. Trish, I've assigned you to a room. Has it not took you through, or do you not want to go in one? Mm. Sunny.
Instructions and writing. Oh,
Mm.
and writing reports and things.
Are we back?
That was so quick, Jez. It was like being transported on Star Trek or something.
It was, wasn't it? But I don't want to take up all of people's sort of
I
lunch
know.
hour. This is meant to be a bite-sized session, isn't it? Not
Yeah.
you know. So I think, you know, for me, one of the things, I'm just going to sort of open sort of the slides again, if that's okay. Find them. Yeah. For me, one of the things about looking at that, when I was looking at those sort of different learning outcomes, was that
We can see your notes page, Jez. It's not opened in slideshow. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. One of the things is that for one learning outcome, you need to use several different activities and several different approaches, because parts of the learning might be, you know, knowledge based. Some of it might be sort of about you know, repeating a task until somebody feels confident in it. So it's actually about thinking about you know how you design that activity around the learner. We mentioned a bit earlier about sort of being an inclusive employer. And this touches on it, isn't it? You know, it's about sort of making sure that you know, if you're going to be inclusive, you need to make sure that all of your workers, that you recognise if they've got specific needs around learning, and that you're able to adapt and you know, and present learning opportunities and learning materials in a way which reflects that. So everyone gets, you know, an equal opportunity to succeed, which is what we all want. So just briefly moving on, I mean, I just want to sort of touch on the different sort of, you know, the learners that might be sort of, you know, in the workplace. So I'm sure you're all aware of you know the you know you'll probably have learners there on sort of apprenticeships, and for social care employers, this is just sort of examples of some of the sort of sort of levels of an apprenticeship programs that you might have people on. So starting from some of the sort of intermediate sort of level 2 programs and care workers right up to sort of leader in adult care. We've also obviously got a lot of degree nurse programs now, nursing associate apprenticeship programs. So and as sort of apprenticeships start to sort of, I think they are becoming much more now common. As employers, what you want, if you're investing in that apprentice, you want to make sure that learning that they're getting, because they'll might be attending college or university, that learning is transferred into the workplace. So it's making sure that you're aware of how that learning within their apprenticeship is delivered, and how that can then be brought into the workplace so they get the maximum opportunity to learn. A couple of other things just to mention, just in case you might have students coming along, request for placements. We've now got T levels. A lot of colleges now have moved on to T levels, and what you'll find, so T levels are sort of post 16 sort of alternatives to A levels, I suppose, but they do involve quite a long industry placement. So I think it's either 45 days or 315 hours of placement. So there's you might be asked to support students on T levels. So there's what we would encourage employers to do is actually think about bringing in some of the offering some of those younger students a placement, so that because we know that that's our future workforce. So we would certainly say that there are some benefits of supporting work experience in students' placements. We're certainly, from social care point of view, we want to promote social care as a future career choice, and it's the same, I'm sure, with NHS colleagues around. We want to attract people into careers. Also, students can sometimes sort of take on part-time vacancies, so they can be useful as an addition to the workforce. They bring in new knowledge and skills, but they also provide an opportunity for your current workforce to demonstrate their knowledge and skills, to share their knowledge and skills. And the other bit is, in terms of, if you're in the independent sector, it's actually increasing brand awareness, because those students will have, they'll be going home to their family, they'll have social media, they can very often help you sort of, promote your brand. So, there's some other benefits there which might not seem quite so obvious. What I want to do now is quickly sort of move on to sort of looking at training nursing associates and nurses, because in Skills for Care, we're doing a lot of work around training nursing associates and nursing associates, in social care settings, and how those placements, really sort of, the learning from those placements really benefits the TNA, but also benefits the employer. And we're working quite closely with the GM sort of training hub as well around sort of placements. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to whip through some of these slides because I've talked for far too long, and I want to sort of just draw your attention to this one particularly. This is really around how the NMC platforms for practice sort of for student nurses can be mapped against social care settings. This is something which we brought out, I think, probably sort of over a year, maybe 2 years ago now, which sort of, as I say, maps those platforms of learning against a range of social care settings. And the reason why we brought this out was because quite often sort of people in nurse education weren't aware of the opportunities that there were for learning in social care settings. So this looks at, not just sort of nursing homes, but sort of other care settings, daytime settings, children's residential services. And what it does, it actually, provide, maps, I say, sort of maps those learning platforms, so that as an, if you're a student and you want to think about a placement, and we would certainly encourage, nursing students to think about placements in social care, they can, use this toolkit to actually identify which bits of those platforms would be met within social care settings. So it's a really useful resource, and if anyone's is interested in finding out more about placements in social care, it's a really good resource to use. What I want to do now is not really go into breakout rooms, but just to tell you a bit about what's happening in Greater Manchester about the work that we're doing around learning environments. I'm just sort of, I'm one member of a group looking at learning environments in Greater Manchester. This work is being led by HEE, and what we really want to do is expand the number of placements in social care settings for nursing students, trainee nursing associates, AHPs, and also sort of social work students. So there's a lot of work going on around trying to sort of grow the number, expand the number of placements. And what we're really trying to find out is what are the sort of barriers that employers face? Why aren't there more placements being made available? So if there are, sort of any of you who are sort of, social care providers, if you want to know more about sort of, if you're interested in taking on students, please just drop me or Carol a line and we can put you in touch with the right people, because we really want to increase the number of placements that there are. As I say, we work closely with the Greater Manchester Training Hub, who have been really, really good at supporting social care providers with student placements. There's also some work, just to make you aware of, that was led by sort of Salford University and partners in other sort of in the other sort of universities around a model for interprofessional placements in care homes. And that was really interesting in bringing together a group of different students from different professional pathways and bringing them together in a care home to work with a small group of people that lived in the care home around making some real positive improvements around those people's sort of either health or well-being. So there's some really good work going on in Greater Manchester. And it'd be really good to sort of, to try and connect with people. I'm sure you're all doing, interesting stuff, and it'd be really good to sort of hear about what you're doing, and then feed that into the group that we're working on around the learning environments.
Jez, just to let you know, it's 10 to.
Yep, right. So, just a few sort of quick tips, just to take away. The one that I really want to sort of there's a couple there that I really want to sort of try and sort of highlight is that sort of offering placements to students has real benefits. It benefits your team, it benefits your organisation. So I'd really encourage employers to sort of look at providing placements for students, and also particularly around social care settings. I think social care settings have got some really great opportunities for learners. From all sort of types of all professions. So I will stop talking now, and I shall hand it back to Carol to see if there's any questions there.
We just had a question about whether they could have a copy of the slides, and Sophie, I think you're going to send those out with the recording, aren't you? After the session, we'll get those over to you this afternoon.
Yeah, I'll send the recording and the slides over either later today or Monday.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I know I have talked an awful lot. Opportunity for a couple of minutes to.
And Katie said, really good session, thank you. So probably draw to a close there, but do get in touch with us and we'll put our contact details in the slides as well, so you can contact us after. There
will be some we'll highlight some resources in the slides that might be of interest to people. So thank you very much for sticking with me for nearly 50 minutes. It was
yeah.
Well, I hope you found it useful.
And I've been sharing things in the chat, Jez, as well, some of the resources and things that you've mentioned. So, okay, everyone, thank you very much, and take care. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well done.
I can breathe. I can breathe now.
You can breathe now. That was really good.
Like I talked far too much.
No, but it's difficult in a short session, isn't it? Hey, baby, have you come to see Jez? You come to see Jez. You brought a ball. Oh, that's so clever. No, that was really good. Well done. That's another thing ticked off the list of things to do, isn't it? So is that it now? Is there no more events now before Christmas?
No, certainly I've got nothing in my, in my
Good.
calendar. And,
Yeah, that's good. Takes the pressure off a bit, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I had a sort of supervision earlier and was talking to Lindsay about just sort of I feel a bit sort of, the last month has been really, I feel quite overwhelmed, but
Yeah.
December, I've actually got a chance to try and control my workload in December because I've got,
I think it's the stuff that you see space in your diary. Well, I do, and then I think, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do that meeting or whatever. But then everything else comes in at you, and you end up actually with no time to do the stuff you need to do. So I have my supervision on Monday, and I was saying to Lindsay that pre-COVID, I used to block in admin time in my diary, and I need to get back to doing that, where I keep some protected time just to do emails and follow-ups from meetings and things, because it just gets too much, doesn't it?
I always try and an hour in the morning to do that.
Yeah. But then you get people are sneaking in and putting things in your diary. So, but yeah, hopefully the foot comes off the pedal a little bit for a week or two now until we get into January, and then it'll all gear up again, won't it? But anyway, no, that was really good. Well done.
Right.
And
Okay. Right. Well,
I will
thanks,
see you later.
Bye.
Bye.